You're listening to Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma, and I'm your host, Trish Close. Kate Payne Brown on the podcast today. Fabulously badass winemaker in the Willamette Valley. Currently winemaker at Ambar Estate and partner at Vinovate Custom Wine, and she has her own label with her hubs, Dolores Wines. Kate's from the East Coast. She's a triplet. Talks about moving to Salt Lake City, the culture shock that was. She did not set out to be a winemaker. Nope. In fact, she wanted to be an eye doctor. But after some work at an urban winery in Portland and a story from a friend, those two things happening at the same time, she decides to explore this world of wine. She gets accepted at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and her sweetie pie at the time pops the question, and off they both go. They decide to come back after she finishes school to work one little harvest in the Willamette. Lucky for us, they ended up staying. Kate talks about her work at Archery Summit and Stoller Winery. And I mentioned to her, it really seems like her life has been chapters in a book, and she agreed with me. My favorite chapter, though, is the story about and behind her label, Dolores Wines. And I feel very grateful that I got to indulge and see behind the curtain a little bit, the chapters of Kate. Here's Kate Payne Brown.
The story of my life.
I mean, Kate Payne Brown, the story of your life is pretty dope. But I have
okay, good, thanks.
I have some holes that I need you to fill in for me, which is why you're here.
Okay, great. I'd like to fill in those holes.
How was harvest? How did harvest go this year?
It was good. I think, I've been talking a lot about it because it's the end of harvest, and now having a moment to reflect. It was long, but this was the type of harvest that we all like to talk about as winemakers when we're out in the market and we're talking to people enjoying our wine. We're like, this is quintessentially Oregon. This was such a good harvest.
What does that mean?
So it was a cooler, August was pretty cool, right? And so we had cooler nighttime temperatures and everything trickled in. I was actually talking to Tony Soder, and he's like, this reminds me of 2008. And I was thinking similarly back to a time when we could make picking decisions solely based on like flavor and maturity and not really be so beholden to what Mother Nature is throwing at us.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, just pick this couple tons here because it's ready, and let's wait for this section that's right below it. And it was just a nice, long, protracted harvest, which is, I think, what we relied on for a long time. And certainly when I was coming up in the industry, it was like you start picking, and for the most part, you're like, well, I don't want to. Everything's a blanketed statement, but we were so lucky in the past with these. I know it wasn't every year because that's why we live in Oregon. There's a vintage variance, but we were so fortunate for a number of years to have this these civilized harvests where we could make these wonderful contemplative decisions on when to pick. And so I think that was one of those. So I think I was writing something up, and I was like, this is definitely the harvest that we all talk about, and the ones that I think put Oregon on the map for being such a special place to grow grapes and to make wine.
Amazing. I think that's also, it's very fascinating to me how you winemaker folks can just remember harvest right off the top of your head. You're like, oh, this reminds me of that harvest in 2008. That was just very similar. And it's like, how do y'all do that?
I know, right?
How do you do
I know,
that?
it's a special skill. I think because you catalog time, you catalog wine and the weather and time kind of in the same bucket in a way. And so with that said, I can also remember, every person who worked harvest with me and what the vintage was like. And it's all kind of coupled in the same package or packaged together. And so, it's funny how it lives in the space of my brain. And and you can, and I think also we're also asked to talk about the vintage and very
100%.
frequently. So
Yeah. I mean,
whether we like it or not.
interviewing people for a couple of decades. I remember spellings like nobody's business and pronunciations and your title of the time when I interviewed you. So yeah, I get that because it's so repetitive in your brain. I want to introduce you properly though. We just kind of dove right into it. Kate Payne Brown, winemaker at Ambar Estate currently, also production team at Vinovate Custom Wine, right?
Partner at Vinovate,
Vinovate,
and then winemaker. So
right? And then also you have your own label. You and the
have our own
hubs, right?
label. Yeah, we'll have our own label. It's called Dolores.
I love it.
So,
Dolores
yeah.
Wines. And there's so much to unpack with all of those things. But I first want to get to, I like to start all of my interviews with, where are you from originally?
So primarily, well, my family's from the East Coast. I was born on the East Coast. So I'm a triplet. I should mention that. My brothers and I were born just across the GW Bridge in New Jersey, because I think that was like the only neonatal hospital that could handle triplets. And we lived there until we were um, 5 years old, and then we moved to Salt Lake City, Utah.
Okay.
My dad worked for. Sorry, there's something that popped up, and I don't know where you went on my
it's
computer.
all good. We can pause for a
There we
second.
go.
Okay.
So my parents moved us from New York City essentially to Salt Lake City.
Not
in
a
the
culture
80s.
shock
So,
at all. Not a culture shock
gosh.
at all.
No culture shock. Yeah, I remember people asking us why we spoke funny, why we said soda instead of pop, or why we said lollipop instead of sucker. Those, those moments that really stuck with me.
So you're a triplet.
There was a big culture shock. I'm a triplet.
Do you guys look alike?
No, we don't. I think you can see a thread that we look related, but my brothers look more alike than I look like them.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I don't know if you just mentioned this. What did Dad do that made you guys move from East Coast to Salt Lake City?
So he worked for American Express. So he worked on Wall Street at the time, and they had moved some of their headquarters from of certain departments from New York City to Salt Lake City. So mainly the travelers trips. He was manager in that department, which is that's a whole other podcast, I would say. Speaking with him, it's so interesting. I mean, that was a moment in time for sure.
There's so many of those little things of our past that are fascinating. Travelers checks and credit cards, the evolution of credit cards and phone books. Do you remember the good old phone book? What happened to, it's like the phone book. I mean, there's so much. Obviously, I would always look up our family in the phone book, but then it was a perfect source to prank call in the summer, right?
I know. Yeah. I mean, phone books. There's a lot of things that, my kids will never know.
I know.
Right?
It's kind of sad.
It is.
What did Mom do? And I read Mom was born of immigrants from Philippines and Hungary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so, and then my dad was born, his mother was from Quebec as well. So, yeah. So, I mean, definitely my parents lived the American dream for all intents and purposes, which is pretty remarkable, I would say. And, only in, the Bronx in, probably, I think it was around the 1920s where a Filipino man and, a Hungarian Jewish woman would get together and have 5 children, right? And so
I love it though.
And then my dad's mother moved to New York and to have my father. He didn't have a father, and she raised him in Manhattan. And so I think they met. Exactly. No, I seem to remember a story where they met at a bank, and that's
nice.
And then they started dating, and they were pretty young. I think my mom was, I don't even know, 19 or something when she met my dad.
Yeah.
So
I love those stories. I love the stories of roots, where we came from, because it's so fascinating and interesting and very rich and cultural. It's beautiful.
I do too. I think, and I've been thinking a lot of this recently because it's so easy to get removed from those roots, especially when you're focusing so much. I think for them, they focused a lot on assimilating and making sure that, there was um, probably some survival, but then to be a generation removed and, be so insulated from
Yeah.
some of that journey is, I guess, what, back then the American dream was about, really.
Yeah. 100%. I always, anytime I'm around my family, I'm from South Carolina, I always ask
Mm-hmm.
stories. I ask for stories about
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother and my grandfather and their siblings and their parents. And I feel like I can't ever get enough of it, because it's, it
Mm-hmm.
really truly has shaped who we are today and who we're
Right.
shaping, our children to be.
Right. Agreed. And so, yeah, I'm still trying to eke out some of those kind of stories,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as I'm not as great of an interviewer as you are, Trish. I need to have you come interview my family
Well,
so I can get all like the dirty details.
exactly, the dirty deets. I think also too, it makes us really remember that time is precious, and if
Agreed.
right, and we lost
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother in 2019, and I think about that all the time. Like, man, if I just had, a few more moments with her, I could have asked her about this, and this, and it would have been
Yeah.
fun to hear it from her and write it down. And so if you're listening out there and you have grandparents and you have, older aunts and uncles, ask them questions and write it down or record the interview. I
Yeah.
promise you won't regret it. What was it like growing up in Salt Lake City? And was it just the triplets? That's it. No more kids.
Yeah.
My
Yeah. Oh
mom's
God,
like
could
one
you
and done.
remember? Yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, I remember having my first child and looking at my mom and being like, and you did this with three?
Yeah.
I just can't even imagine. Yeah. So back then, we were a product of modern medicine.
Yep.
My mom was on fertility
Yep.
and drugs, and that's how she ended up with three babies, which is remarkable to think about. So, yeah, just the three of us. It was interesting. I think we were definitely, we didn't know at the time, but we were definitely fish out of water for sure. I think my parents in particular, coming from, New York City, to very different um, climate
Yeah. Yeah.
of Salt Lake City. And so I think that's why they kind of doubled down on raising us Catholic, to make sure that we were, I don't know, set us apart for sure. But in retrospect, it was a great place to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
It was such like an easy place to grow up. We lived right in the bottom of two big canyons. So we had four ski resorts, 15, 20 minutes away. And so um, dates back then would be like going up in the mountains and like going rappelling or going hiking or
Of
something like that, which
course.
is so, I know, I mean, it's funny to actually verbalize, but
Yeah.
it's just a different world. So I think had we, I don't think we would have had that same sort of um, those same experiences had we stayed on the East
Yeah.
Coast. It'd be different for sure.
Well, I'm sure too. It's also land of Mormon, so it's also you're
Right.
going to high school with a bunch of like really really nice good kids.
Yeah.
I
We're all, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And it's good. I mean, you find there's still some mischief happening. It wasn't all,
Thank goodness.
kids are kids.
You need a little bit of
But
mischief. You need a little bit
yeah,
of mischief.
it was good. But yeah, to your point, there was a lot of wholesome activities.
Right.
I don't know that.
That's very Bend, right? Let's go on our date. Let's go get coffee and then go for a hike.
Yeah, well, even then, coffee, like certainly not on
Oh
a
yeah.
date.
Yeah.
It wasn't, but I mean, the rest we drink coffee. I don't know. We are kind of on the outsiders. We are the outsiders. So you find this little enclave of folks that are in an LDS church, and you kind of you stick together.
Yeah. I went to high school in Vegas and there was a big Mormon population that had been moving into Vegas at that time. And I remember I'd never even heard of like Mormon before. Like I just was like, wait, what? I kind of had heard about this religion, and then I met some friends and I was like, oh, you guys are Mormon? They're like, no, we're Jack Mormons. Like we're the mischievous, like non-Mormon family. It was hilarious to me.
I mean, it's all in the news right now. Not in the news, or the kind of popular lexicon with like the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. I get asked if I watch that a lot. And I just had some dear friends in town who we were talking about. I was like, I watched one episode and it was a little triggering for me. I couldn't watch it.
Yeah, I bet.
It's just so chirpy and like, nope, I can't. Yeah. We kind of lived it in a different way.
You did. Yeah, you did. Yeah. Did you meet your husband in Salt Lake City?
No, I didn't. We were set up on a blind date, actually.
What?
I know, which is so crazy. I tried my hardest to get away from Salt Lake City. And one of my closest friends in high school was dating one of his closest friends. And my friend Corey, they were in med school together, and he kept saying, you needed to call Griffin, and you need to meet this guy. And this is, I think maybe I had a MySpace page, but nobody used any of that. Like, it was such a different time. What year was it? 2001. And so I'm like, Corey, I don't want to date anybody. If he wants to, he can call me. And he's like, well, he wants to see your photo first. And I'm like, what? It makes him think I'd go out with him anyway. So, of course, after a glass of wine, I decided to call him up and ask him out. And I think just to be, I don't know why I did.
Ballsy.
And
that's ballsy.
So I come to find out that, the only descriptor that my dear friend Corey, that I've grown up with for since we were 5, the only descriptor that he told this woman Beth was that I was Filipino. And so Griffin was expecting somebody who looked a little bit different.
Someone who looked a little bit different than you, right? Gotcha.
But
that's funny.
Yeah, it was funny. But yeah, we met over gin and tonics and at a bar in Southeast Portland.
Fantastic. So I read that you actually did not set out to be a winemaker. This was not some lifelong dream in high school. You were dreaming about making wine.
No, I was not. I always had this kind of affinity to science in particular. And so I was going to, back then, the kind of metrics for success, if you were had an aptitude towards that, was, going to the medical field in that route. And so I decided to go to university and study biology and chemistry and pursue optometry, mainly because I've always kind of struggled with my vision and kind of felt that was interesting to me. And so, graduated, and that was kind of on the path that I was on. And I was living in Portland. I had met Griffin at the time, and we were living in Southeast Portland, and I started volunteering for Hip Chicks Do Wine, which is a little urban winery, and it was right in our neighborhood, well, not far, in the Eastmoreland area. And I was like, oh, I'm enjoying this. And kind of at the same moment, we had gone on a Harley ride, a multiple-day Harley ride with some of Griffin's dad's friends, and one of them was like, and this is how I remember, I met this guy, or this gentleman had said, I know this guy, he's a great consultant. And how do you put it? He said, or Oregon State is looking for people with strong science backgrounds to, go into this program. And this grape consultant travels all over the world drinking wine and growing grapes. And it was just kind of this bizarre conversation. And it definitely started percolating. It was like, well, I like to drink wine. I like to travel the world. I like to, I'm like, well, I don't know anything about growing grapes. But so, yeah, I started to look into it. And so it kind of piqued my curiosity. And I was like, well, I went to University of Oregon, and so I was looking for a little bit of adventure as well. So I started looking for other programs, and I remember Griffin saying, he's like, oh, I don't know if I want to move to California. And so it's just funny how life happens. I had a friend who was going to doing her master's in basically cartography and GIS in Australia. And she's like, you should look at University of Adelaide. They have a really world-renowned wine program. And so kind of capriciously, I applied, having very little wine experience. And getting into I mean, it was remarkable, only 20 people from all over the world admitted to the program every year. And to be able to get there and just started this path. It was so incredible.
So what was it? Was it the volunteering at the winery or the conversation that sent you, or was it both that you were like, I need to look into this?
I guess how I remember it in my brain, they happened at a very similar moment.
Okay.
I think one amplified the other, right? They both was confluence of two things happening at once that set me on this path.
So you were studying to be essentially an eye doctor, and then it was like changing gears, mom and dad, I'm gonna go to Australia and learn how to make wine.
Yeah.
And what did they think?
They were not very excited by it at all. In fact, I put together this presentation, and not that I was expecting them to pay for it at all. Sure. It's like, I'm an adult, I'm gonna go do this. And I just kind of said, I do think it was one of the most capricious decisions that I've ever made. But I was like, I'm just gonna not go to optometry school. I'm going to leave the country and study winemaking. And my parents, I know it's so funny to think about. I don't remember the conversation, but I can remember that they were just like, okay.
Right. I mean, yeah, you're, again, like you said, you're an adult, and they were just like, okay.
Yeah.
And Griffin went with you?
He did. So we had already been together for about 4 years, and he was super supportive. And I said, I think I'm going to move to Australia and study wine. And he was like, great, let's do it.
Wow.
So yeah, he came with me, and he didn't have to, but he ended up, because he could have come as my dependent because we had already lived together for 4 years, but he decided he wanted to propose. So I basically got into school in December. He proposed in February. We got married in June, and we left in July.
Oh my gosh. This sounds so very whimsical, very magical, very whirlwindy, right? Like,
it'd make a good rom-com, I think.
For real. Yeah. Let's go to Australia. But he went with you. Obviously you're married, but he didn't go to study wine, right? But I mean, he kind of fell into it there.
He did fall into it there. He had a hard time finding a job. South Australia in particular is pretty insular, and he was having a hard time finding a job in, like, he was working in the printing industry. And so it was just hard for him to find a job. And then a friend of ours, that we had known, for all of like a few months had come. It's like advocated for him to work at a winery, which was Petaluma. And she was like, "Oh yeah, Griffin's a legend. I've known him for years. You need to go there." And what had happened, Petaluma was affiliated with Argyle here in Oregon. And during his interview, it was Andrew Hardy and Con Mashas, who, kind of well-known figures in the Adelaide or the Australian wine industry. And I think during his interview, they had asked him if he'd gone to Lumpy's. It's like, "Oh yeah, I've been to Lumpy's," and they basically were like, "You're hired." And so we joke. And so while I was getting my graduate degree, he was going to working for Petaluma. So
love it.
We joke that we got two educations for the price of one.
For
and for
real.
better or for worse, we were, in the same industry, which sometimes during harvest, now having two kids, we're like, "Gosh, maybe we should have diversified." But
So
you make it work.
in this university, you're studying enology, right?
Yep, studying enology. Mhm.
Did you feel like at this point, again, you were on this path to do something different, but here you are in a completely different world studying something that you didn't even realize you wanted to study. Did the light bulb go off for you though? Were you like, I am in the right place. This is where I'm supposed to be.
I think initially I was like, "Oh my God, what I do?"
Uh-huh.
This
Sure.
was having not had the wine background before. And I just thrown back into it. And so it took a minute. And I think the way that you were accountable for information and how you had to think about, you know, what you were learning was certainly different than how you were provide information were tested from my experience at American universities. So it was such a different way of learning material there. And when I think back at it now, it was such a gift, right? To be able to be so removed from family and friends and everything that you've known and focus solely on one thing for a couple of years. I mean, lived we lived for all things wine, and we were we were a close group of students. We all studied together, we all drank a lot together, and we ate together.
Sure.
It was an incredible time.
And I said magical. That is a magical time. You just newly married, you're again going to school, you're in this completely different world away from friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you look back on that and just go, I'm so glad that I did that, even though initially it was this idea of like, what did I get myself into?
Oh, I'm so glad that we did that. Yeah. I have nothing but positive,
Mm-hmm.
memories and experiences. And I think it'll pushes you to, one, as a couple. I mean, we had initially no other support group but ourselves, right? And so, which was pretty intense as a newly married couple.
Huge, yeah.
Right. And so you just have to figure that out. And then, we were able to travel a lot. We were just so removed from kind of all of the obligations that we probably would have had
Mm-hmm.
had we stayed close to home. And so I do think it was such a gift. And so you just never know where your life is going to take you or what path you're going to go on. And yeah, I feel like it was one of those things where I'm like, it was somewhat out of character for me to be like, "Great, we're just gonna move." And get rid of everything that we have, and move,
Across the
thousands of
planet.
miles away.
Yeah,
Yeah,
across the
essentially.
planet.
Mm-hmm.
How long did you stay there after you finished the program? Were you guys there at all, or did you move back?
We did for another 6 months almost.
Okay.
We were did a harvest and traveled around a bit, and then we were planning on going back, but we had come back to the States, to Oregon, to do a harvest. And in Oregon, thinking that we would just do a harvest. And the reason we made this decision was that, we kept talking about how wonderful Oregon Pinot Noir was. And so we'd go out tasting and we're like, well, this is nice, but like, you really should try the Pinot Noir in Oregon.
Right.
And so we're like, okay, we should go back and do a harvest. And then we had every kind of inclination, every kind of plan was kind of heading back to the Southern Hemisphere and traveling around and doing another harvest and potentially staying there for another handful of years, kind of working. We were hoping to get residency and stay there for a little bit longer. And then we ended up coming back to Oregon. I got a job at Archery Summit, and Griff got a job at Domaine Serene. And this was in 2007. And right after that harvest, we both got offered full-time jobs. And so we were like, well, jobs at these places don't come along. We knew we wanted to eventually end up here in Oregon, and kind of just fast forwarded our timeline. So, or what we thought our timeline was too. And it's funny because at that time, having had kind of this previous path of pursuing optometry, and felt like I was so old, right? It was like, we need to get going. We need to start. And which is now, when you think back, you're like, oh my gosh, we were children.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I was going to say, Oregon does that to you. You come here and you think, I'm just going to be here for a little bit. And then it's just like this, it puts a spell on you. And it's just like, no, you're going to stay.
So true.
It's very,
very
so
true. You get an Oregon summer and then you never want to leave.
Just the weather in general. I think that's interesting. You said, and I hope it's changing, this idea changing, that we have to do all these things in our 20s. We have to be so successful in our 20s. And I read somewhere, it's a famous quote. My life really started at 40. Everything else before then was just research.
Yeah.
And it's so true, right?
Oh, it is so true. But I don't know that I recognized that. I certainly didn't recognize that at all. At that time, there's always been this need to have like achievements on this certain timeline. And so I hope it's changing.
Yeah, I do too.
I think, I don't know, by the time I was 30, I was like, I should be a CEO somewhere.
No.
It's not a mega, you know what I mean?
No,
right?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, I'm not equipped to do that.
I think in that sense, we all need to slow down just a little bit and really just focus on, learning and growing and living in the moment. So yeah, I do hope there's a shift there. Archery Summit. I've interviewed Ian Birch a couple of times. So I know the skinny on Archery Summit. And what's fascinating about this facility, I want you to fill in the holes for me here, but like, it was built in a specific way, correct? Like this no gravity system.
Or just gravity, only gravity.
Only gravity. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. What was it like working there? Because I mean, it's a gorgeous, beautiful facility in the Willamette.
I mean, it's a wonderful experience. So fortunate to work with Anna Matzinger and Lee Bartholomew. And so it was you talk about magical times in the Willamette Valley, and Archery Summit was during that time period such a magical moment. And we joke in particular, like we were all in a winemaking team before it was marketable, right? And so I remember definitely learning. I mean, I learned so much about winemaking. I learned so much about, again, taking the time to craft wines and kind of being contemplative. And Anna was particularly great at setting that tone. We still had to kind of we worked really hard, but we also took the time to spend like a couple hours tasting and writing these very long tasting notes and being contemplative of where we were going with the wines. And but to your point or to your question with the gravity flow, things were pretty analog. And I think, you learn how to use gravity. You learn things aren't weren't necessarily done in an extremely fast pace, I would say,
Yeah.
because you are, I don't know, I think it took like, depending upon what part of the cave you're in, you're like, it could take 5 minutes to fill a barrel, depending upon how full the tank was and how much head pressure you have, or it could take, 12 minutes if the tank's getting lower and you're like not using a pump, and depending upon how far you are. And so, yeah, I mean, so that was over 6 years of my kind of like formidable kind of
Mm-hmm.
winemaking time. And so it was definitely more on the analog
Sure.
kind of spectrum. And so I think when I left there, I was like, oh goodness, like it wasn't using all the fancy pumps and all the equipment, because we were unfined, unfiltered. We used all native yeast. We used gravity. So kind of just expected things to take longer. And
Yeah.
so
No,
it was a different time.
I didn't realize it was an all woman team at Archery Summit when you were there.
Mhm. So, and we did have, well, Anna's winemaker, I was the assistant, Lee was the vineyard manager, and they were co-general managers. And then we did have one gentleman who's still there by the name of Corey Byer.
Okay.
So
That's
he was
pretty
the second
rare.
master.
That's
Mm-hmm.
right. And this was
Yeah.
in like like 2007-ish time.
Yeah. 2007 to 2014.
That's pretty rare at that time because I mean, I did want to ask you about women in the industry, and I guess now is a good time to do that. Um, it's changing. It is
Mm-hmm.
changing, but I think, and I have some female winemaker friends who hate this question. They hate it. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, let's get over it. There's women in the wine industry, blah blah blah. It's not a big deal anymore. We can do all the same things that guys can do, blah blah blah. I guess what are your thoughts on women in the industry? Because I do feel like, do you think there's good representation?
No, I mean, I think there are great women in the industry. I think that, um, I mean, I still think there's a lot of work to be done in
Yeah.
terms of bringing women to decision-making roles. I think that certainly there were less women in the industry when I was kind of coming up in it, and so there were fewer roles. And I think um, I think because of that, it pitted more competition um, between women than needed to be. With that said, I've always felt really uplifted and supported by all the women in my life who have kind of carried me to where I am today. I think that um, some of the advice that I had got, that you have to work 200% harder than the men. You have to do things like, basically you have to um, act like a man in order to get things done in it. And I was like, and I think at the time that's valid advice. But I think now with some time and I think you just need to work differently, and you need to celebrate like what you're good at and what your strengths are. And I think that comes with perspective. But I think, yeah, for the longest time, I think that was a very big stress of
Sure.
mine, was like, um, how am I going to continue to prove myself? And how am I going to have a family? When I was newly pregnant, I was like, I don't know how I can do this job and still have a family. And I think I think that's probably one of the number one questions that I get
Mm-hmm.
from women in this industry is how do you make it work? And um, I'm like, I don't know if it's very gracefully, but you just do.
I
And I
was
think there's a
just
lot
thinking
more.
that. I was just thinking, you just do it. You just do.
Yeah. Yeah. You just have to do it. But I think there are a lot more, there's a greater understanding. There's, I think more, certainly more women in the industry, than even when I started, and certainly,
Mhm.
more from when like Anna and, that kind of first generation of women who paved the way for the rest of us. Um, and so I think this idea that you can work differently and achieve the same goal is I guess gaining ground. At least I like to hope so.
Sure.
I don't think there's this still. I mean, there's always going to be challenges, but I remember, like I remember trying to or going to unload a truck, and I had like braids in my hair, and one of the drivers were like, "Is there somebody that could unload this truck?" And I was like, "You're looking at them." They're like, "Is there somebody else?" And I was like, "Not if you expect to have your truck unloaded today."
Yeah. It's me.
So
It's me, honey.
yeah, and so I hope that still doesn't
Yeah.
happen. But I mean, who knows? I think you do see a lot more women in the industry, and I think when I was kind of first kind of finding my footing. I don't know that it's like, I can be a winemaker not have like the preface that I'm a woman. And now I'm like, I kind of gone a little kind of walked back on that a little bit.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? I want to own that badge a little bit. But
I think you should. Yeah, I think we all should. I mean, I think it's you're leading by example when it comes to that. I like the idea that you said, we do things differently, and my husband and I talk about this all the time. There are things that he can do that I not can't, but can't. Like when it comes to
mhm,
like lifting something that's really 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 heavy, I can't do it. I would hurt my back. He can do it just fine. And then there's
right.
things that I can do that he can't do. So
Mhm,
I feel like we should lean into what you just said, and that we can do things differently and get there at the same time and collaborate. And it doesn't have to be
mhm,
this competition. And that goes with women too. There's, other women journalists out there who do things totally different. Is it better? Maybe. Is it, am I don't know. But it's like we do things differently, but we can still
mhm.
support each other and be there for each other.
Right. I think when you kind of approach it from like there isn't necessarily a scarcity issue, right?
Yeah.
There's room for lots of different perspectives
Yeah.
and lots of different capabilities, and everybody's, you know, trying to do their best. We're just trying to do our
Right.
best.
Every day, just trying to survive. We're just trying to get by. I feel that way with Women in Wine, this beautiful
Mhm,
organization that we're both a part of.
mhm,
I've always had guy friends growing up. Like I was just kind of that girl. And it is a little intimidating when you walk into this room full of very strong, powerful, opinionated women. And I
mhm.
will say this organization is one that is so completely different than any other environment that I've been in, where it's beyond friendly. It's so welcoming. It's amazing.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a great organization to be a part of. And I think what when I first entered it, and I was like, oh my goodness, okay. I love that I'm meeting all of these women from not, I mean, there's a lot of women that were winery adjacent as well. And so it just completely broadened my circle. And then you realize like how much support that there
Yeah.
is out there. And I think it was important for me to join it and to kind of pay it forward, because a lot of my career I've been supported by a lot of really strong, wonderful women. And I was like, well, it's my turn to kind of give that back and to be of service and to make myself accessible and
Sure.
um, to other people.
Well, thanks for doing that, because it's
Thank
people like you that you are inspiring this, new generation of female winemakers, that they look at you and like, well, Kate can do it. Kate's a badass. I'll do it too. I want to be a badass like Kate.
Like, gosh, well, thanks. You make me blush when you say that, actually.
It's true.
But no,
It's
I mean,
true.
anybody
There's
can do it.
lots of people who would agree with me. You talked about, in motherhood and being in this industry, how did you do it? A lot of people ask you, how did you do it? A lot of it too comes from the companies you work for, right? I read somewhere with Stoller, when you worked at Stoller, it was commonplace that you had a baby on you.
Yeah. It was so, it was, I mean, and I really credit Melissa Burr for kind of setting that tone there. She
Yeah.
made it enormously um, acceptable to have a family, and to, we can still do our job while having a kid strapped to you. And so I remember going to the president and going to her and like, oh, I'm pregnant with my second child. And you're always kind of, and I'm due like, a month before harvest.
Oh man.
I know. And so you're really worried about those conversations. But of course, it was like so supportive. And so, yeah, William was born July 23rd, and it happened to be in 2016. That was such a warm vintage. It was similar, again, when we were thinking about cataloging vintages, it was similar to last year, right? Where it was really warm and pretty dry, and everything came in early and all at once. And I remember talking to our vineyard manager at the time, this was kind of the beginning of August. And I was like, you should just go, you should go sample these grapes for me, because I have, a 3-week-old. And I don't think they're ready, but maybe it's been hot. And I got a text that same day, and he's like, oh, it's not 18 bricks. And this is today. I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, right, we're doing it. So sweet William packed him into a little carrier, and we started pressing, and then it just kept going. I mean, fortunately that year, we'd had like a rain event earlier on in that spring. And so the clusters were super tiny. And so, well, the reason it was early is one, because it was hot, but then also the clusters, like these like Pinot clusters, were just these little tiny little clusters, which provide a lot of concentration, but it made it ripen earlier. So I just had my kiddo with me, and my mom came, and she would take him in the morning and then bring him to work. And so I would just have him kind of strapped to me, or I'd be like, hey, hold my baby, or
hey, you hold my baby.
hey, 21-year-old intern, hold my baby, my newborn. But I would get Melissa was so funny. She would just be like, oh, I'll just take him, and I'd get pictures of them in like the tasting room. Random like people would be holding my baby. It was definitely pre-COVID times, right?
Yeah. But I mean, it takes a village, right? Like that's so cliche, but it's so true. It does. If you have a job to do, you have people around you who are willing and happy to support you. And sometimes it's like, I don't know if I could have done that if I didn't have those people.
Oh, I think even thinking about that this year, I've had so many people like who help with the kids. And I think that's important, to have the village and have your community. My kids are now older, but they're just as active and want all the activities. And so there've been a handful of families, and along with my family members, that have come in and stepped up and, get them to where they need to go, and get them to, basically they live with their families on the weekends during like the harvest month.
Sure.
So, which is crazy. Which is great. I'm so grateful for it. But it's always this time of year when we're kind of reingratiating ourselves to our children and kind of re-entering society, where I'm like, oh yeah, what have you guys been up to for the past couple of months?
What's been happening in your life?
Out. Yeah, tell me all about it.
Let's play catch up. When did you start at Vinovate Custom Wine?
So I officially left Stoller in June of 2023. 2003 and basically officially started at Vinovate right around there and,
Oh,
as
wow.
well. And yeah.
That's brand new. And then
Hmm.
Ambar came. Ambar was sort of happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a wild year, I would say, a couple years. So this is our second harvest in the facility, which is great. I think again because vintage was so protracted, we're able to you know bring in the fruit when we wanted to. Is much more civilized harvest, I would say, this year.
And I visited you at
You
Ambar
did.
in September.
Mhm.
What a beautiful, beautiful location. I just cannot say enough about it. It is so stunning.
It is. It's so stunning. And, Rob and Pam, who, I mean, that was their vision. They wanted this um, place of that felt very calming and
Yeah.
like, with the Japanese garden and the rocks, like the raked gravel. It's just very meditative. And you walk in there and you're just like, oh my goodness. And the way that the tasting room overlooks the vineyard. I mean, it's just stunning.
Yeah.
It's such, I was like, I don't want to use the word Zen but it
It
is.
is
It's
Zen.
very, it is Zen.
Very, very
Yeah,
Zen.
there's not another word. That's fine.
Speaking of Zen type things, do you think there's a philosophy for you when it comes to winemaking? Do you have a winemaking philosophy?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I think that there is always um, a guiding light, but I don't know if it's a full, like necessarily a philosophy that can adequately be articulated. I think there's anybody who's worked with me knows that there's a lot of feelings involved in winemaking, and I don't think that. Um, I don't think wine making is a recipe. I think you have to work with um, the raw materials that you have in that moment. And so I think that's also why I really like using native ferments because you're getting that vintage variability and you're getting, and it's not necessarily the Saccharomyces that are doing that. It's what's coming in from the vineyard, what's happening in the cold soak, and what's happening before the ferment even happens. Um, so, in terms of philosophy, maybe I don't know if I can. I don't, like I said, I don't know if I can adequately articulate it, but I think getting to know a place and working on that relationship with the site itself and
Mm-hmm.
then the wines and kind of building that memory and building that relationship over time is um, maybe a way to simply talk about any sort of philosophy is
Yeah.
just relationship building.
I like that you said feelings because I'm very much the same way. Everything I do, there has to be a why. There has to be some sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
intent, reason behind it. And I don't ever, if someone's like, hey, you should do this, it's like, no, I'm gonna stay in my lane. I think I'm better doing this and I feel good about doing this. Do you ever, walk through the vineyard right before harvest time? You're sort of, tasting grapes and, doing things here and there. And is it already in your head like this is what this wine's going to taste like, or is it always changing, always evolving?
Um, I think it's always changing, always evolving. But I think as long uh, when you start to build a relationship with a vineyard or a site or a brand or whatever, you have well, not always, but like you have an idea of where it's going. With
Sure.
that said, with a place like Ambar is a developing vineyard, you're still we're still trying to get to know each other, right? Not really at a point where you have these older vines that have you kind of know their personality. It's like
Right.
we're still sussing each other out, which is exciting. So you can I think experience allows you to kind of see a direction, but it's not going to be the same it's never, again, it's never a recipe. It's going to evolve every
Sure.
year, right, with what the vintage gives you and yeah, what you're up against.
Are they
So,
toddlers or teenagers?
ooh, I don't want to say they're teenagers yet. They're still in their precocious phase.
Perfect. Perfect.
But I think that's true with anything.
Yeah.
I think um, it's about relationship building. And so whether it be um, with a vineyard or with people or with your team, I think that's what makes you successful is fortifying the relationships around you.
100%. I do want to wrap up a little bit, but we have to talk about Dolores. We have to talk about
We
this
do.
this label. I love this so much. I love this story so much. Your mom, her name was Charlene, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you lost her in 2016. Is that right?
I did. Mm-hmm. Like right after. Yeah, it was a crazy year. So I had my second son, and then my mom passed of pretty much instantly of a heart attack while walking in New York City with my brother. It was so tragic. And so here was with a newborn and a toddler trying to figure it out. So around that same time, I guess it would have been in 2015. The year before, we had started the sparkling project with Pinot Gouge. And so I had had a few friends splitting this acre of this rare varietal. So only about like 10 acres planted globally. And they're like, you should split this acre with us. And a friend was like, you should make sparkling. Oh, I should, just funny, whatever.
Just money.
Um,
Just money, honey.
and so we had gone through and made the base wine and garaged it in 2016 and started to think about what we wanted to call it. And then, of course, my mom passed and trying to figure out what that could look like. I think it's kind of circles back to your point of just sitting down and talking to people and getting people's stories. And I don't think I did this very well with my mom. I wish I had. But I remember at one point her kind of relaying the story of her time when she lived in Spain, and that everybody called her Dolores because it was, this term of endearment, kind of like calling somebody their last name because her last name is Payne.
Right.
And Dolor means pain in Spanish.
Yep.
And so she was like, people just call me Dolores. And it was the way she said it too was kind of cheeky a little bit, right? She was like living her best life called and people were calling her Dolores. And I was like, I love this idea of adventure and this alias that you have that she had and in a great way, right? And so I was like, that's what it should be. This project should be about joy and adventure and I think it kind of exemplifies what I guess when we think about philosophy to kind of walk back on that, my philosophy with wine and winemaking in general should have this element of joy and curiosity because why are we doing it if it's devoid of that? So if it's always the same, then I feel like then you're robbing yourself of that curiosity and that joy and that ability to be creative. And I think when well, it's funny now again in my 40s to think about it because having like the strong science background and I was always far more linear and kind of had to stay in the lines. And as I've gotten older and have been able to color outside the lines. And it's funny how much I value creativity as opposed to the linearity of life. And so one of my brothers went to art school. And so the way that he walks through life was always very different than I did growing up. But one thing that kind of always stuck with me, I remember he went to art school in New York, and he's like, we need to go to this restaurant, but we need to approach it from this street, and we need to go in from this entrance, and we need to sit at this table, because you sit this, then you can kind of look at everything around you. And that's kind of just how he approaches life in general. Everything is very visually beautiful and curated. And I was like, wow, oh my God, we see life so differently.
Yeah.
And this happened when we were in our 20s. And so I just remember having that, like, whoa, actually how we walk through life is so different. But now I was like, oh, there's this, I think there's some intersection there. Probably both from like thinking about things on a visual basis, but also this idea of creativity and beauty that comes from, creating something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was your mom spicy? She sounds like she was spicy.
My mom was very fun. She ended up, building this wonderful career where she traveled constantly. I think she traveled like 300 days a year. Like, she was one of those like million-mile flyers. It was always very fun to fly with her. She worked for an insurance company, and so she had to do a lot of presentations all over. And so she was fun. My mom was so much fun. She just had this huge personality, so much so that whenever she was visiting or in town, people would always like, oh, Char's in town, we got to be at your house. And so she just attracted, I don't know that she knew, she would have thought about this, but she just was such huge, like, attractor of people. Like, people just wanted to be around her. So she was great. Yeah.
Well, I can just imagine this, cheeky, sassy little thing. What, this was the 70s when she was in Spain, walking around, people yelling, calling her Dolores.
I don't know that. Yeah, maybe. I think she was probably more demure at that point. I don't think she kind of walked into her bigger personality until she was older, but maybe not. I would have loved to. I mean, she was always very fun, but yeah. But that's, also where I get my silver hair from. So she went silver pretty young.
Love it.
And I knew that I was going to probably have that as well. Thank God.
And it's this beautiful, Dolores, the wines that you're creating, it's just this beautiful tribute, right? To this woman that had so many stories and was so fun, and people loved her. Like, just, I love it. That's such a beautiful full circle.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Oh no. Can you hear that?
No.
Oh my gosh. Somebody just called me and my AirPods picked it up. So.
Oh no. Well, we are almost done. I've eaten up so much of your time. But I love this adventure that you've been on in this winemaking world. And I was doing my research, and it's like, Kate's had chapters. You've had all these beautiful chapters.
I have had chapters.
I love it. I love it. And it's just, we all need to remember that you don't have to do the same thing for years and years. You can do the same thing in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's 100% true. Yeah, nothing's formulaic. You don't have to, you don't have to live up to anybody else's timeline.
Right.
I still kind of remind myself of that from time to time, right? You can do things, do things your own way. Figure out what works for you.
Totally.
Was that Burger King? Do things your way.
Have it your way. Have it your way. Yeah.
Trying it. I'm so trite now, but.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up quickly, get to the final 3 questions that I ask everybody. Best advice you've ever been given?
I've been so fortunate to be on the receiving end on some wonderful advice. But I think the one that really kind of changed an outlook that I can pinpoint to was, I think it was my first day at Archery Summit, and Anna was racking all these barrels, and I had never rolled a lot of barrels, or, an empty barrel still weighs about 90 pounds, and I'm only 5'3". And I remember having having to clean and move all these barrels up and down the hill of the cave. And I got into the car, and I think we had racked maybe I think we had racked like 18 barrels or something that day. And I think I was supposed to clean all of them, and I think maybe I cleaned like 5 or something. It was so slow. And so I remember back when my husband and I were commuting together from Portland, and I got in the car, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can do this. And so I was like, you have to learn to roll a barrel. Nobody's going to respect you as a winemaker if you can't. Let me show you how to like kind of maneuver your body, and so you can kind of leverage your body weight and know how to move it properly. And so in retrospect, like I do think people will respect you if you can't roll a barrel. Although I think at that point, at that time, it was wonderful advice to be like, you can do this. Mm-hmm. Just, figure it out. Again, do it your way, but this is how you can be successful. And so that I pinpoint to that one a lot. Like, okay, yep, I needed that kind of kick in the ass.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for sure. We all do. What's your happy place?
I would say one of my favorite places is to be on top of a mountain skiing with my kiddos or skiing by myself. So, or the après ski after. I mean, all kind of rolled into them.
Bubbles, right? Bubbles after?
Yeah, 100%. Or yes. On top of the mountain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, whatever works. Yeah, whatever floats your boat. And all things food and drink. What do you crave?
I was thinking about this because you had sent this along, and maybe it's because it's starting to get cold in the winter. But I find myself craving comfort food, and particularly my aunt's eggplant parmesan. Can't help it. It's like, please, want some of that.
Love it. Oh. And then in the beverage world, what always sounds good to you?
Oh, it's so funny. And maybe because it's harvest,
beer.
Just crave beer. Funny. This time of year, I'm just like, I just want a light beer.
Uh-huh.
And so we have kind of a stock of the Bucks Bucci in our refrigerator all the time.
Got to clean that palate. You just got to cleanse it.
Mm-hmm. You do.
Kate Payne Brown, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I've had the absolute pleasure to get to know you through Women in Wine the last couple of years. And I'm just so stoked that you let me in today behind the curtain.
Oh gosh. Well, thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm honored to be on your podcast. It's like just such a gift to spend time with you and bask in your light, because you are a force, and thank you for everything. And I can't wait till when I can see you in person again. Hopefully we can spend more time together rather than like me. I think I was like covered in grapes and
You were in your uniform. You were in your uniform, in your element.
Yeah, like a black shirt and like gray jeans.
Perfect.
Uniform.
Well, I just want to let everybody know, if you pick up a bottle of wine and the winemaker is Kate Payne Brown, you are one lucky human to be able to consume that. So again, Kate, thank you so much.
Thanks, Trish. It's been such a pleasure.
You've been listening to Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma with me, Trish Close. You can watch this podcast and subscribe on my YouTube channel. Just search Hungry for More, an Epicurean's Dilemma. You can also listen and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts.